Hello, everyone.
All right, internet people, let me know if you can hear me. I got my laptop up. I just want to make sure that our microphone is good. So just drop it in the chat. Can you hear me? Mic check. 1 2 1 2.
Give us a thumbs up, something.
Alrighty, I think we're gonna call that good.
All right.
I believe there's just a delay here. Here we go. Okay, let me check real quick. There we go. And we're good. All right, cool. Thank you. It's all good. Okay, boom.
All right. Welcome and thank you for joining us for Weeknight Workshop. My name is John Paul Clark,
And I'm Blair.
and tonight we're talking about house hacks. How we lived for free in a duplex and didn't have to pay our mortgage. So, a lot of people ask, how do you do something like that? But really, you should be asking, why? Why would you choose to live in the property where you have tenants? So, before we tell you how,
Yes.
we're going to start with the why.
The why. And the why is very important. Like, why do you do anything in life? Okay. So you got to have that anchored before you jump into the how do I do it. You got to figure out why are you doing it. So for us, it was when John Paul and I decided to start a family, we had a pretty extreme financial reality check. So we figured out that once we had a baby, if I was going to keep teaching, pretty much all of my salary was going to be eaten up by daycare costs. And then if we wanted to have more than one child, my salary would be right out the window. The other part of that reality check was if I stopped teaching or if my income was consumed by daycare, we weren't going to be able to afford our lifestyle anymore just on John Paul's solo income. And our lifestyle was pretty modest to begin with, right? So it was a reality check for us. So, in that point in time, we had to make some pretty tough decisions. So, we decided that I would stay home, I would leave my career, and I would stay home with the babies. And then also, we decided that we would sell our house, our beautiful first little house that we had bought right after we got married, because we wouldn't be able to afford it anymore. So we did all of those things, left my career, sold our house, went and lived in my parents' basement for a little while. Thank you, Mom and Alan. And so I was really grateful for a lot of things. Let's plug gratitude in right here. I was really grateful for our amazing family that supported us. And I was really grateful for all of that time that I got to spend with my babies, with my kiddos while I was at home with them. But honestly, after leaving my career, I felt this weird void that I wasn't expecting. My identity had been wrapped up a lot more than I realized in being a teacher and being a career woman. And I felt really frustrated also because I had graduated college at the same time of the global financial crisis. The economy had crashed down. Everybody remembers that schools and all things government funded, all employment government funded, was really struggling at that point in time. So I had gone to college, I had a degree, I had a career, and I still couldn't afford anything because of the crash. My salary was like so abysmal.
So, what Blair was saying about that process we went through, it was extremely humbling. I went from the head of the household into a guest in my in law's basement. And that was hard for me. I had my master's degree in teaching, I had a full time teaching job, but still it wasn't enough to provide the life that I wanted for my family. So the decision for Blair to leave her career and for us to sell our house was a very hard one for us. We also realized, though, we wanted to follow the principles set up in Romans 8. So we knew that as long as we looked for it, we would find the good that God had for us in every situation. And lo and behold, once we made those tough decisions, the good started coming our way quickly.
Yes. So I am in the wrong spot. I am so sorry. Boom. All right. All right. All right. All right. Sorry. I was typing in the chat, lost track of where my notes are. Um, So yes, John Paul and I really try to, especially in the last few years, everything that we do seems like a big deal in the moment, and when we look back at it on like hindsight, everything always works out for us, always. And so, like he said, we practice those principles in Romans 8. Everything always works out. And so when we sold our home, that actually worked out for us a lot better than we thought it was going to. It was a huge bummer to have to do that, but the proceeds that we made from the home sale were much bigger than we had expected. So we used those proceeds to pay down a really big chunk of our debt. We held up in my parents' basement for a few months while we figured out what it was that we were going to do next to like get back on our feet. And so what we did was we decided, you know what, if we go out and we buy another home, fully renovated, move-in ready home, we're just going to get back into the same situation we were in the first place. We're not going to be able to afford our mortgage. So we made this crazy, wild, reckless decision to buy a fixer-upper instead of a move-in ready house, this crummy, rundown fixer-upper. Buy a fixer-upper and then live in it while we flip it. We had a baby at the time and another one on the way, but we just took a chance and decided, you know what, like, let's just do it. Let's just have a little bit of an adventure. And so last week on our live event, we actually talked all about that, our experience with doing our first live-in flip, which that experience, that endeavor ended up being the thing that launched us into what we have now built up into our real estate investing business. That was really like the cornerstone, big, scary move that we made that ended up really being not that scary at all. But we talked all about that in last week's live, like how we did it, how we found it, how we flipped it, how we made it all work. So if you guys want the story, we've actually posted the link to last week's live down in the description below so you can hear all about that experience.
So as we were wrapping up that renovation, that live and flip, we asked the question again. So what are we going to do now? And it was around that time we got together with some family and I was having a conversation with my cousin. He tells us that he bought a duplex, fixed it up, moved in one unit and rented out the other. And that tenant was paying the mortgage on that unit, on that whole duplex. And immediately that like clicked, we are going to do that thing, that light bulb
Mm-hmm.
moment. So we've decided this is a way to live in a property that earns you money as opposed to costs you money. So Blair and I both immediately said yes, and that's what we started pursuing.
Yeah. So what John Paul just described, like that sentence, I'm going to reiterate it again. That really should be the first question that you ask yourself before you jump into any real estate investment scenario is why would I do this? So the why behind why would you want to live in a small multifamily on site with all of your tenants, especially when like you're trying to raise a family, you got little ones, etc. But the main thing was like when we talked to your cousin, shout out to Aaron. Thank you for being a key player in changing our life. Um, you live in a property that makes you money. Like that part of your income, that huge part of your income that went out the door toward your mortgage payment, you get to keep that
Yes.
because somebody else is now paying your rent and that somebody else is your tenant, right? So for us it meant a lot of things. This is why we did it. It meant that I could still stay home and I wouldn't have to go out and get a job. It meant that John Paul wouldn't have to go out and get a second job or maybe a third job, right? Just to be able to afford the house. John Paul's paycheck started going a lot further. Paying our bills got a lot easier. Actually doing fun things. I remember that we had our first real family vacation about 6 months after we moved into the duplex because we were able to stay up to actually like go to a hotel that had a splash zone, etc. Whereas before it was just like really cheapy stuff like visiting family and going camping and stuff like that. So it was all because our biggest living expense, which had previously been our mortgage, was now being paid for by the man upstairs. And I don't mean Jesus, I mean our tenant who lived upstairs because the type of property that we bought was an upper flat and then a lower unit. I kid. I'm being funny.
It's all good. So now that we explained the why of what we did, we'll get into the how, because this is probably what you really want to know is how do you do this thing? So first I'm going to define what is a house hack. So for us, it's when you buy a small multifamily, you move into one of the units, and then you rent out the other units. Uh, Typically, it either costs you very little or you live there for free, because just like any rental property, the rent you collect goes directly towards your taxes, insurance, and mortgage payments. All right. So, house hacking is a super popular way for you to get started in this whole real estate investing business. There's some key points that you want to hear right now. Number one, it's a low barrier to entry to purchase great real estate assets. 2 to 4 unit properties, which are the most common house hacks, are considered residential properties. As long as you live there at the time of purchase, you can get a primary residence mortgage just as if you were buying any single family residence. Conventional loans require anywhere from a 5% down payment to an FHA loan, which is 3.5%. So the
The
good
good news
news,
is
you don't have to live there forever.
it's not a lifelong commitment, or at least a 30-year amortized
Yes.
commitment, right?
So you can double check with your lender on their policies, but we had a 1 year minimum requirement. After that, you can move out, you can keep the property, put in a different tenant, and now your financing doesn't change, and the property that you lived in can start making you more money. So we lived in our duplex for 2.5 years. It cash flowed very well after we moved out and put in a new tenant in its place.
Yeah. So we're going to talk tonight about the top questions that people ask us when they hear that we have done a house hack. We've actually done it twice. These are the top questions that people ask us. So, John Paul and I do a lot of networking. I teach at different networking events. I'm a member of an awesome network that you guys should join on Facebook if you are interested in doing real estate in the state of Michigan. It's called Michigan Real Estate Investor Network, and I've done a lot of teaching on that. And one of the main things that we teach is how to flip houses. But I noticed that one of the most frequent questions that people ask us is, you guys house hacked. What was that like? How did you do it? It seems so awkward. Like you guys had a family, all these different questions. So we've got a handful of questions that are like the most frequently asked questions, but also for those of you that are watching live, because I did see a handful of people just plug some questions into the chat. We're going to take a minute to answer these top questions, but I want you guys to be putting your questions in the chat, just like, hey, Paul, how are you? Just like Paul just did. Hello. So type your questions in the chat too. If for some reason you're watching the replay, plug your questions in the comment section. We will get your questions answered very soon. So while we are doing this, be thinking of your questions. But the main one, number one, that people always ask us is, how did we find a multifamily building property that was the right fit for us? So you have to take into consideration who you are, what you've got going on. We were a little family of 4. We had a toddler and an infant when we moved into the duplex, and we also had a giant chocolate lab. So we needed a duplex that had some space. Like 500 square foot unit was not going to cut it for us, right? So there were just different things that we had to take into consideration, but really it wasn't that difficult for us to find the property because we did a combination of looking for it ourselves, but we also used a realtor. And we used a realtor that we knew had helped some other friends of ours who wanted to invest in rental property. We knew that she was already an experienced agent she could find you a home, she could find you a building, she could find you that small multifamily in between. So that's who we went with. But also the city that we lived in at the time just had a bunch of small multifamily right there within the city. So it was very convenient. It was one of those cities where they used to have these huge, giant single family homes. But at some point in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they converted them all into like 2 and 3 and 4 unit properties. So we actually had a plethora to choose from. But what made the search, I think the easiest on us and the easiest on our agent is we sat down and created a list of criteria that we needed based on our specific needs. So your list might look a little bit different than ours. But I think a general list to give you guys, I'm just going to read from my list here, is how we thought about how much space we would need. We also thought about, do we want to renovate the property before we move in it? While we move in it, do we want to do a tenant unit turnover type of thing? And since we had just moved out of a live-in flip that took us over a year to finish, I was pregnant the whole time, and then we had our infant, and he was like 4 months old when we finally finished up that renovation. We were not looking
Nope.
for a property, another fixer upper. So what the duplex that we ended up buying was move-in ready. We had to do a little bit of cleaning and, put your own finishing touches on it, sort of thing. But we didn't want another big renovation project. All right. So you got to think about that. Do you want to renovate it before you move into it? Because your cousin Aaron had done that. He did like a full reno, but he was single guy, no family at the time. So it was a little bit different situation for him. You also have to think about the price point when you're looking for these properties. And again, you can make that easy on yourself if you're not bringing cash to the table. Or if you are, I mean, you know how much money you have in the bank, or if you're getting financing like we do, then really before you even start talking to an agent or looking for homes, you need to talk to somebody, a lender, and get pre-qualified. They'll tell you how much financing you can bring to the table, and they'll tell you what type of financing you qualify for too, okay? So you'll know what your price point is just when you talk to a lender and you get it's called your pre-qualification letter. They literally tell you you're qualified for up to this amount. So you know what price point to look in. And then another thing that we wanted is we didn't want a tenanted property. We wanted to find a vacant property. We could have found a tenanted property, waited for the leases to be up, and then asked those tenants to leave. But because this was our first experience being landlords, we were just I'll just be honest, we were a little bit timid about having to do that. We had never done that before. Now we're really good at telling people get out. But at the time, we wanted something that was already vacant for a few reasons. And the main one was we wanted the property to be vacant because we wanted to set the tone and set the expectation when we moved in. We wanted to be there before we moved the tenant that we were going to be sharing that space in that property with to come in. We wanted to be the ones who vetted the tenant, screened the tenant, talked to them, got to know them before we moved them in, and not just take their word or the seller's word that we were buying from, that like, oh yeah, it's a good guy, good lady up there, you know what I mean? So that was a huge reason why we wanted it to be vacant. So because we put together that like really specific criteria, our agent only ended up showing us a handful of properties, and it really wasn't that big of a deal. We found one pretty much right away. And because we knew that this was a temporary living situation, we would only be there for a couple of years. It didn't have to be absolutely perfect. It didn't have to be in the perfect neighborhood. The house didn't have to have all of the perfect bells and whistles that I would want for the next 20 years, because we knew that this was just a way for us to get into it. So then once we identified the property, we sort of visualized things out like, this will be the unit we occupy versus this will be the unit our tenant occupies. And then, we chose the upper and lower rather than the side by side because there was actually less shared spaces. The lower unit was direct access to the basement with no access for the upper unit. So we had a full basement. We had a much larger unit on the bottom, and the garage was completely our access. The first floor access was obviously a lot easier because I'm hauling a toddler and a car seat around like everywhere I go, right? So those were just the different things that we took into consideration. So the second question that we get a lot, and I just talked a ton, so I'm going to let you take this question, is how did you end up finding a tenant that was a good fit for you?
So yeah, this is the big outlier. People love looking for homes, and especially when you're looking to buy and move. But how do you manage a tenant? How do you find the right tenant? Because it can make your world very easy, or it can make it very rough, and you can't really escape it. Okay, so uh, the biggest advice I can give you with a tenant is when you're first looking for them, find a realtor who has experience with marketing to and finding tenants. And that's exactly what we did. So the same agent who helped us find the duplex also helped us find the tenant. She knew how to market the unit and worked with other agents to find good candidates. Part of her services was also to vet potential tenants, do background checks, credit checks, things like that. Our agent's brokerage provided all of the documents that we needed, including applications and the lease. And later, when we bought more rental property, we managed those ourselves. We had an attorney draft up a lease, and we had documents that were specific to our business. We also managed the marketing and tenant screening. But using an agent for
Right.
the first time around really helps you with the learning curve and to make us way more comfortable with how the process works. What do you think?
Yeah, so we don't use an agent anymore, but that's because we learned the ropes by having somebody hold our hand in the beginning, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, right? So I know that it's an objection for a lot of people. They think like, well, I would like to do what you guys are doing, but I don't know how. And it goes back to something that John Paul and I talk a lot about. It's often not the how, it's the who, right? And there's a book that I have not read called Who Not How, right? And it's all about who you're using, especially in those beginning stages, to help you just get over those few first hurdles. And then from there, you can just take the reins and completely just do all of these things independently on your own. So, the other question that we get asked all the time is a very good question. It's sort of like um, when you're getting together with a group of people, how does everybody get along and play nice? So, you live on site with your tenants. How do you do that without driving each other crazy, right? So, how do you live on site with your tenants in a way that makes everybody feel comfortable, but you are still able to maintain your professional boundaries and all of the things that you need to do, right? So, this is a very important question because you do want things to go as smoothly as possible. I've got a whole list here that I'm just going to read for you guys. This whole question fills up like this entire
Get
page.
out your notepad. Here
I
we
know.
go.
Start taking notes or just keep hitting rewind. Just keep hitting that button, right? So this is a very important question because you do want things to go as smoothly as possible. You want your tenant to enjoy very much living there, especially if they are a good tenant and they're paying their rent on time, which our tenant was. He was awesome. You want to enjoy living there too. You need to be comfortable because it's your own living space, but you still have to do all of the landlordy things. And you still need to be like a certain type of way, and sometimes it can be weird, unless you establish certain parameters, protocols, expectations, like right out the gate, which goes back to what I said about we wanted the property to be vacant when we moved in because we just wanted to move in, establish ourselves, and then set the tone for whomever it was that came in. So here are the things that we established up front. And we reviewed all of these things with the tenant before he moved in, and he agreed to everything. So, the expectations were on the table, and nothing was weird later because we got everything out of the way, right? We had it all on the table. So we had all of the shared spaces designated. It was 1 yard for the whole duplex. The duplex had a shared backyard, but we set up special little space for our tenant. There was this area where there were just a bunch of bushes and flowers and stuff like that. We ripped that all out. John Paul laid down paver stones. We bought a table and like a little chair set so that he had his own patio outside. But because we had a dog, we had a special fenced in area for when we went out, we would take the dog out and we would put her in that fenced in area. And when the tenant came out, the way that his exit was is as long as the dog was in the fenced in area, they never interacted, right? Like she might come to the fence and beg him to be pet because like I said, she's a giant chocolate lab, but you have to make sure that your tenant is comfortable if you're going to have a dog on site and they're going to be walking through that area. So we also set expectations of what is the maintenance that the tenant would handle versus the maintenance that we're going to handle. Like, for example, if something broke, we would fix it. But if your light bulb goes out, that's on you, that type of stuff. Figuring out the utilities if they're not already split, because especially if you're going to buy one of these properties where it used to be a big house and it wasn't built as like a side by side or a 3x3, 4x4, a lot of times there's going to be certain utilities that are shared. So you need to figure that out beforehand. You need to talk to them about extended visitor stays because obviously you're going to allow your tenant to have visitors and have people come over, but you got to talk to them about there is a length of time when your visitor has overstayed their welcome and now it sort of seems like you've moved a roommate in but not put them on the lease, right? You talk to them about pets as well. Like, are they allowed to have pets, or not allowed to have pets? Kind of an awkward one that you need to talk about, but you got to talk to them about smoking and drug use. Like you just do. I mean, you just say it and you're cool. You just get it out there and then you move on. You don't make a big deal out of it. You don't make any assumptions or anything like that. But if they do smoke, and they're not allowed to smoke in their unit, well, where are the designated spaces outside that they could smoke? Noise levels, and then certain time frames for when those noise levels need to come down, right? Respectful use of the property, that's an obvious one. And then protocol for communication. So communication is super, super key. That was one of John Paul and I's strengths, I think, is in communication. But when I'm talking about protocol for communication, what I mean more is how are you going to talk to your tenant, and then how are they going to come and talk to you? Meaning, if something crosses your mind, you're not just going to go and beat on your tenant's door and like talk to them about it right in that moment. Or if they have something they want to bring to your attention, they're not just going to like come outside and like, or go to the balcony and like yell.
Start yelling
Yeah,
at you.
yell at you from upstairs while you're downstairs trying to like down in the yard trying to grill a
Stomp on
hamburger
the
or something like
floor.
that. Right. So just etiquette. I guess that's what I mean to say. More like communication etiquette. So what we did is like I would text him like, hey, can I talk to you tomorrow between 10 and noon about a thing, and just sort of scheduling conversations with him. I mean, he was just upstairs. I could have just gone upstairs and been knocking on his door, but I'm trying to respect that space and those boundaries, right? Protocol for entering your tenant's unit. You can't just go in there whenever you want to. You do actually have to provide notice. You have to let them know up front how often you're going to do inspections to the property, because you do actually have to do those landlordy type duty things. How are you going to collect your rental payment? And then what do you do when they're late on their rental payment? And again, that comes back to communication. We just let our tenant know that, like, if you're ever going to be late, just let us know. We're going to work things out, but please communicate with us, right? And then our motto that we sort of developed while we were doing this was, we discovered that we are courteous, but we are curt, right? Like, we're courteous, but we're curt. We are friendly, but we're not overly friendly. We're not overly familiar, and we are not party people. But if you are, I suggest that you do not party with your tenant. Like, don't put yourself on that same plane as them, because it just makes it so much harder when you got to take off like your buddy hat and put on your landlord hat. It makes those types of dealings a lot more difficult. And then the last question, which is actually the easiest question to answer, is how did you purchase the property? And so John Paul kind of already went over those things already, so I'll keep it super brief. We got bank financing. That's how we purchased it. We did not use our own cash other than what we had to bring as a down payment. We used a mortgage broker, and we use mortgage brokers as often as possible, because they are the ones who go out and they do all of the shopping, all of the negotiating, all of the searching for terms for you. You do pay them what I think is a very small fee at closing if you do actually close on the property. but it is so worth it to have them do all of that stuff that I am not an expert with anyway. And then we actually qualified for FHA financing for this property, which was awesome because we only had to put 3.5% down. And then that was it. It was all a very smooth process. And so I'm going to let you take on some of the last random questions, but real quick, I want to answer some of the questions from the chat. So if you have just hopped on and you have any questions that we haven't answered yet, just go ahead and drop those in the chat. But I want to just answer this one where Paul, hello, Paul. He asks, does it have to be zoned multifamily? And so, Paul, I'm going to say that I assume so, yes. If you're having just roommates live with you, so let's say you're going to buy, you're a single person, you're going to buy a 4-bedroom home and you intend to have roommates living with you, that's a different situation. The properties that I'm talking about, and that I assume you're talking about, Paul, are where the units are completely separate. Like we are not seeing each other in the hallways or in passing. There's no shared bathroom, shared kitchen, nothing like that. So where we lived, yes, our property was zoned multifamily. It was a duplex, so it was zoned as a 2-unit. And then in the city that we live in, you are no longer allowed to take a large home and convert it into a multifamily. But if it is already an existing multifamily, then it's grandfathered in. So our duplex and then also the other multifamily property that we have in that same city, they're zoned something. It's called it's like qualified and non-conforming. Like somebody correct me in the chat because I'm saying that wrong. It's non-conforming, but it's grandfathered in. So it's I'm getting that word wrong, but it's like they've qualified it. Man, I'm going to look this up while John Paul answers the next question. But it's called a non-conforming property, but it's grandfathered in. So they've qualified it. They've sanctioned it, right? So we get a bunch of random questions too that aren't necessarily like our main questions, but I'm going to give one over to you.
So yeah, if you are looking for these properties, how do you know you find a duplex, 3-unit, 4-unit? How do you know if it's a good deal? And the simple answer is the mathin'? Yeah, right. So if you're looking at it, you figure out what your monthly payments are going to be, and does the rents in that area, are they equivalent to the mortgage? Maybe it covers just the mortgage, maybe it covers mortgage, taxes, and insurance, whatever those things are. If it covers those things, then you're good to go. So even if it's not even quite there, you're still going to get cash flow once you move out of it. So it's worth it in the long run. And that's the thing with rentals, it's a long game. All right. So when you're doing flips, that's short game money. But with rentals, you're in it for the long game. So even if it's not like cash flowing on day one, you're paying down your mortgage with your renters' monthly payments, and eventually you get there to where it becomes a positive asset to you. Tell them about that mortgage calculator.
Oh, yeah. So, Paul, going back to your question, I looked it up. The word I was looking for is compliant, not qualified. Compliant, non-conforming. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, so how we figured out whether or not our duplex would, whether the rent from one unit would cover the mortgage payment. Or I guess you would say like we reverse engineered it because we figured out our mortgage payment and then we figured out how much rent would need to be. Was that even a realistic amount to charge for rent, right? So there's a mortgage calculator that I've actually linked up in the description section. And it's just this free mortgage calculator that somebody referred to me probably 7 or 8 years ago. And I've been using it to figure out what the mortgage payments would be. And it's really cool because you can play around with it. You just plug in the amount of your loan. So you're buying a property for a certain amount, putting an amount down. What you're plugging in is the remainder. Like, what are you actually taking the loan out for? And then you just plug in your other variables. What is the interest rate that you're getting? What is your amortization period? Meaning, are you taking a 15-year loan or a 20 or a 30 or whatever it is that you're doing? And then it will tell you what your mortgage payment is. Now, your taxes and your insurance, those are different figures that are not included in your mortgage payment. Yes, you can escrow it and make all of those payments all at the same time, which a lot of people do, a lot of lenders insist on. But this is just talking about what do you actually owe on the debt service of the house. So we've got that linked up for you guys. Another random question that we get, which is like the answer to this is just, it's so simple, but people like, they freak out about it. They're like, well, what if I want to have pets? Because I own the place, darn it, and it's my right to have pets, but I don't want my tenants having any pets. I don't even want them to have a goldfish. Then you just tell them no, like we did. We actually made our duplex, the other unit, we made it no pets. It was a pet-free zone. But then, like I mentioned, we had a giant chocolate lab, and we did not feel like hypocrites. We did not care. We owned the property. But we had zero pushback, like absolutely zero pushback about it ever. And it really wasn't that big of a deal. Another scary random question that people ask us is, well, what if I have to evict them? Which doesn't seem like that big of a deal when you don't live there. But when you live there, how am I supposed to evict these people, right? Isn't that going to be weird? So we had an excellent landlord attorney that was referred to us through the networking group that I mentioned. So if you're just getting started, get into networking groups because you're going to find the people who are going to connect the dots for you and bring you the information you need. And so this guy, when we had concerns about the eviction moratorium during crazy COVID, we were going to buy another rental property, but we were getting cold feet about it because we were like, well, what about evictions? We're not able to evict right now. So what he suggested that we do is don't give a 1-year lease. Don't provide a 12-month term. Just do month-to-month leases. And the way he structured the lease for us is we aren't sitting down month after month signing a new lease with our tenant. The lease just rolls over month to month to month indefinitely until either we give our tenant notice or our tenant gives us notice that they are going to be moving out. And so all you have to do if you have a problem tenant is you don't have to evict them. You just have to wait for their month to be up. And you let them know as soon as possible. We always try to give a full 30 days. Sometimes you might let somebody know in the 3rd or the 4th week of the month, and then you got to give them that whole next month. But really, you only have to deal with them for maybe an additional 5-6 weeks, and then you're not having to go through the eviction process. You're just simply not renewing the lease, and they don't live there anymore. So that really solves that problem quite easily. Okay, last question is for you.
We were there, so we can address this pretty clearly. Last question. I'm just a novice. Won't my offer get beat out by all these savvy investors? The answer to that is probably not. Because you're house hacking, you have a distinct advantage in this situation. When you're buying a primary residence property you're able to pay almost market value for that, whereas investors they're looking to get that as cheap as possible. So yes, they're going to be coming in with cash in hand, and cash is king. But if you're able to be much closer to what the seller wants, you stand a good chance of getting that property. All right. So for example, when we went and bought that first duplex, we really wanted the property, but the seller had already had an accepted agreement with an investor. So what we did, we bought our time, we waited, and then after the inspection period, the investor came back and haggled with the seller over all these fixes and repairs to try to get the price down. The seller was not happy with that, so they cut that agreement and came back to us and took our FHA terms instead, because we offered very close to the listed price.
Right, exactly. And that that was our advantage at the time. Moving forward, we definitely have been that person, been that investor who needs to get something for as cheap as possible. But like John Paul said, you can do this, especially if you plan on living in the property. Like you can do this, right?
Hmm.
So don't get cold feet and don't think that some big bad investor is going to come in because they're just trying to wheel and deal, and you are actually more serious because you're going to be living there, right? So John Paul and I have house hacked actually 2 times. We've done 2 live-in flips. We have house hacked 2 times. All in like a 6-7 year period. Our children don't know any other life. Like this is all that they know. We're not doing that anymore though because we're getting tired.
Yep.
Like we are definitely getting tired of that. But it went very, very well for us. And so we would absolutely recommend house hacking for anybody who wants to, jump into real estate investing. Like John Paul said earlier, it is such a low barrier to entry. You can leave after a little while. It's not a lifelong commitment. And then when you leave, you just put another tenant in your place and here you've got this like really great cash flowing asset, but your terms stay the same. And so it's just a really really beautiful way to get started in real estate investing. And that first live and flip that we did, this first house hack that we did, man, these were just like key moves that we made that seemed scary to us and weird to our family at the time. But like I said, those were foundational moves that we made that helped us to start this real estate investing business that we have. And, at the beginning of this talk, we were talking about how we were super broke. And because we did this, because we've been working on this consistently, building this over, the last 6, 7, 8 years, we've built a business that adds an additional, it's over $100,000 a year that it adds to our income. All right. And so I don't say that to just throw a number out there and be braggy. I say that because if we can do this,
You can do
you
it.
can do this.
Hmm.
All right. And we're hopping on YouTube on Monday nights to teach you guys these principles, to teach you these strategies and the different things that we did. And we would spend hours going over every little detail and every little nitty gritty thing. But that's the reason why we're doing this. We're doing this live so that you guys can ask your questions, get them answered right on the spot, or just leave us a comment, and we'll answer your questions later. But we really want to share with you guys the things that we did because jumping into real estate investing changed our lives. Like if you can change your financial situation, you can change your life for the better. And really all it takes to get started is just determination and creativity, and you also have to take the time to learn from other people who have done it. So that's why we're providing this providing this platform. And I once heard Grant Cardone say, it doesn't take money to make money, it takes courage to make money, right? So if you guys are out there and you're feeling like, I really want to do this, but I just don't know how, well, then tune in next Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern and every Monday night for the foreseeable future because we'll be doing weeknight workshop again next week and the next week and the next week and the next week. All right. So do all that YouTubey stuff. All you people out there in internet land, do all that YouTubey stuff. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification button so that you never miss another live event. And then, like I said, if you're watching the replay, please drop a comment and we will answer your questions.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you all next Monday night here at Weeknight Workshop.
All right. Thanks, you guys. Take care.